This is a special presentation of Farm Journal Television.
Today's farmers have high-tech equipment, from tractors to GPS to the hybrids fighting for every bushel. Here to help is agronomist Ken Ferry.
There's definitely some things we put into our systems pyramid.
And agronomist Missy Bauer.
So we're trying to create that true V trench.
And they're using the systems approach to higher yields on every acre. I'm Clinton Griffiths, and she's Margie Fisher. Together, we're Corn College TV.
Corn College TV, brought to you by Winfield, uncovering insights through data to help farmers be greater. Visit your local retailer or learn more at winfield.com. And by Micro Essentials, the next generation of fertilizer designed to meet the needs of advanced farming technology. For more information, visit microessentials.com.
Welcome to Corn College. Missy, today we're going to talk about planting and that piece of the systems approach. What do we really need to think about whenever we get ready to head out to the field?
Clinton, there's a lot of things we want to think about when we head out to the field for planting. You know, there's a lot of things we do ahead of time, but once we get to the field, there's some really important things. One of the first things I want to remind people of is making sure their planter is level. So we're talking about that main toolbar on that planter being level. If it's not, you adjust your hitch height up or down to make sure that we are running level.
Okay.
Another important aspect that guys really seem to struggle with getting set right is down pressure. So we're talking about the amount of down pressure on the gauge wheels themselves. You know, too much down pressure can hurt us, not enough down pressure can hurt us. So trying to get that fine tune is really important. That kind of leads into planting depth.
Right.
Planting depth sounds like it's something pretty simple, but it's really important that the guys get uniform depth across the planter and are planting into moisture.
Right.
So what's that mean? Sometimes maybe it's 1.5 inches, sometimes it's maybe 2 inches or more. It's key is make sure we're planting into good moisture.
Yeah, and some years we're really wet and some years we're really dry.
Exactly, and field to field. So a lot of times it'll be different from one field to the next. So you think, well, this isn't something I just set at the beginning of the year and that it's the same all the time. It'll be different as we move across different fields and as the season dries out or gets wetter, vice versa.
Well, after that seed gets dropped in the trench, what are we watching from there?
From there, we do want to make sure that we're getting it closed properly. So the closing wheels are a pretty important aspect on the back. There's all kinds of different closing wheels we can run through, but getting that seed trench closed as well as firmed around the seed itself is very important.
And if it's not firmed properly, what happens? What are we at risk of?
What we are at risk of is just uneven emergence. So if we don't have good firming around that seed or the seed trench closed properly, we'll get a lot of variability at the time of emergence, and that's going to lead to hurting our ear count. So remember, all of this always goes back to that ear count.
Yeah, and what about how fast we're traveling across the field? That's got to make some sort of difference.
It does. You know, a lot of times guys think, well, I got my planter all set perfect, it's all set up in the shop, and then they go out to the field and they kind of ruin a lot of what they've taken the time to get set up properly. Once we go faster than about 4.5 or 5 miles an hour, a lot of things start happening on this planter that we don't like. In other words, we get a lot of bouncing going on. And as we get a lot of row unit bounce, we'll start to mess up our seed spacing and just the uniformity out in the field itself. Again, all leading to hurting our ear count.
Bottom line, planting, pretty important step in the whole process.
Very, very important step in this whole process, yeah.
You know, we got a pretty important job to put the seed in the ground and close the slot from the bottom up, firm all the air pockets out of the soil so the seed won't dry out, and that we get good seed to soil contact. We can run into problems with what's called rootless corn syndrome when we don't have an environment for the crown root to develop. In this case, the seed root, the seed was planted into moisture and it emerged okay, but the slot was left open, and these first sets of crown roots that come out, they don't grow into air very well and they don't grow into dry soil. So they come out and they nub off. So the first one nubbed off, the second, the third, and we have this nubbed off mess up here. And that's going to lead to floppy corn. The corn isn't anchored very well. It isn't until the brace roots that come along later that can grow into air that they're going to be able to get themselves down and anchor this plant to try to salvage it. Of course, this plant's not going to make it in the shape that it's in. This rootless corn was triggered by an open slot. The open slot was triggered by planting, in this case, in a cover crop situation where we didn't have good closure. Maybe a little too wet, maybe a little too much down pressure, or maybe not aggressive enough on the closing wheel itself. And what we left was a seam. So a situation where we left a seam in the soil where the seed was. So if I did a cross section of the row at planting time. I don't want to see a seam in there that come together. I want the seed tucked in there and not know how it got there. And in this situation, if we'd looked at this at planting time, we would have seen a seam in the furrow above our seed, and that tells us as this dries out, it can crack back open. And that's what happened here. It cracked back open before the crown roots got developed, left our crown roots in the air, and we end up with rootless corn and a floppy corn situation. Okay, so here we're in some later planted corn for in this case for plot demonstration. Here's my ground line. I can see where the mesocotyle broke through the ground line and opened up and the plant came out. The crown now will be set here in this top 3/4 of an inch of soil. This seed root is going to take care of things. It's off and running here in pretty good shape. It's going to feed this plant and allow it to set up the first, second, and third sets of crown roots, and everything would go along as normal. This soil right here is so dry that if it doesn't rain here in the next 10 days or so, there won't be enough moisture to set up those crown roots. They'll come out, and just like this plant, they'll nub off and they'll stop growing. And it's not a factor of open slot or sidewall smearing or too wet at planting time, but in this case, just too dry a soil. So the soil around this crown area is just talcum powder at this point. It's so dry that roots are not going to develop. So this corn plant's going to come up out of here. It's going to get some size to it if it doesn't rain, and it's going to get kind of floppy, and then it's going to be subject to seedling blight, stand loss, all those things that would come along with that. And a situation where, again, same concept, rootless corn, but two different situations. Planting too wet and maybe too much down pressure. In this case, planting in just too dry a soil, and we don't get rain. So that can be frustrating. We can eliminate some of this by how much tail pressure that we put on the corn planter to try to tuck this thing in tight. But when we're planting in bug dust, like we were here, it's so dry, it's probably the only way we can stop this from taking place is we're going to have some type of rainfall here in the next 10 days to reset the soil and get some moisture there to set those roots.
Still ahead, replant or let it stand. But up next, tips on planting into heavy residue.
Over the generations, fertilizer, the unsung hero of the farm, has been in the background, quietly nourishing crops with very little fanfare. Until now. Meet the next generation of fertilizer. Micro Essentials.
There are 406 million acres of cropland in the U.S. Winfield is helping to make them work harder. Maybe the answer isn't a new product, but a new way of thinking. A way to turn data into something you can harvest, driving efficiency into every molecule. It's time to rethink what a business partner can be. It's time to be greater. Winfield.
Depending on how your system's set up, whether you're conventional till or no-till, is really going to impact your emergence and your plants. Tell us about what we see here.
What we have here is where we had planted into a heavy residue situation. So this is a corn-on-corn situation. This part of the field we're in here is even no-till. So you can see we had a lot of fodder, a lot of residue down here that we're trying to fight through. So a lot of times in a no-till situation, a guy might have a coulter, no-till coulter he's running on his planter. But what really gets important in this type of a heavy residue situation is to actually have a row cleaner on there to clean things out of the way and keep it clean, actually move all that residue out of the way.
And why is that important? Does it make a difference with plant health and emergence or seed to soil contact?
Yeah, what we find is in this example here where we didn't have a row cleaner, we had a coulter which helped do a little bit of tillage rate in that row. But we have so much residue that's still in here that it's more difficult for the planter to get through here and get that seed placed down in the bottom of the trench. So we get a lot of what we'd call pinched residue down in the seed trench. So I dug this plant up. It was a little bit behind some of the other plants, and there was a lot of residue here right around that seed.
Right.
So what we'd like to do is actually take the row cleaners and move that residue out of the way. So we see that effect on the early emergence, and even now when we look at these plants, you'll see that there's some plants that are further behind than others. You know, we'll dig this up later. Chances are there's a piece of residue that's pinched down in there that maybe either changed the planting depth on this plant, maybe shallowed it up, or just didn't give us good what we call seed to soil contact. So when this plant goes to germinate and emerge, if we have good seed to soil contact, it can take water in uniformly. If it's got residue around it, it's not going to pull much moisture out of the residue.
Right, definitely. What about that residue? Does it make a difference? Because a lot of times we're planting when it's still fairly cool out. Will that make a difference at all?
What we see a lot of times in that early growth where we've got a lot of residue like we do in this row here compared to where we've cleaned it out over here is we will see a difference in the early growth. So these are looking at plants from the side where we did not use a row cleaner here compared to where we did use the row cleaner. So just that little bit of moving that residue or trash out of the way allows this soil to warm up that much more.
Okay.
So we see that it comes out of the ground just a little bit quicker, and we get that better early growth.
Okay.
So not only can it affect the uniformity, you know, like we see here, also gives us a better shot early on.
Okay, and the quicker and sooner we can get this plant up and growing, the better our stand will be later on.
That's right. Anytime we can try to get this crop out of the ground in a shorter amount of days, the more uniform things are.
Okay.
So if we can get things up in 7, 8 days versus 14 or 15 days, it makes a big difference on the uniformity that we see out there in the field itself.
Corn College TV, brought to you by Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Supercharge your phosphorus this fall with Avail to maximize the use of your fertilizer investment in the spring.
Supercharge your P with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Studies show that when you add Avail to your fall-applied phosphorus, you can see an average increase of 9.9 bushels of corn per acre. Avail reduces phosphorus fixation to promote more efficient P uptake to the crop for stronger roots, better overall plant health, and higher yield. Supercharge your P this fall with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer to maximize the use of your fertilizer investment in the spring. Ask your fertilizer dealer for details today.
Have you missed profit opportunities due to incomplete or outdated market information? Are you keeping up with trends in land values and cash rents? Stay better informed with ProFarmer. ProFarmer goes beyond the everyday market news, digging deeper to help you make great business decisions. This is your opportunity to maximize your success. Visit ProFarmer.com to become a member today.
Ken, just driving by this field, it looks pretty good looking down that row. Lots of green plants coming up.
Yeah, from a distance, you know, 55 mile an hour, this does look like a pretty good cornfield. It took that farmer getting out here and walking this field to realize, even though it looks good from the road, looks like things are getting off to a good start, it's got some pretty serious issues out here in the field that we need to take a look at.
So what have you found that seemed to be the biggest problem? Now, we planted early.
Well, unfortunately for this field, it's got multiple problems, and usually that's the way it is. You start stacking small things on top of each other, and one can be the trigger mechanism that takes this field out of the running or has to be replanted. And in this situation, it is an early planting. We got in here and got this planted in March. And we're in a dry spring, so we got a lot of dry soil to deal with, so some of this seed ended up in dry soil. The other problem we had is we had a frost, or in this case a freeze, and this corn was just approaching the surface of the soil, and the freeze was able to get down in the soil some. The drier the soil, the deeper the freeze would go. Okay. Then on top of that, the one that probably kicks this out the door for us is the fact that we were putting fertilizer in furrow. And the fertilizer in furrow in dry conditions is a big hazard. And we would say, if you're worried about germination because the soil's so dry, don't put starter in furrow.
Well, let's dig up a few of these and take a look.
Okay, so if we look at this plant, this is the ground line. You can see where the mesocotyle made it to the surface before it opened up. So this plant then leafed out in a more normal way. It did get frosted a little bit and brought back, and you can see the frost damage on it. If we count the collars, we're already at 1, 2, moving into our third collar. So this plant is going to put on a viable ear, and you know, we're going to count it part of our ear count. But on the left of that plant was this one. Has again a root system doing what it should do, but it got frosted before it made it out of the ground, and
tried to leaf out underneath the ground. So we got a situation where we've got this stunted plant. Now he still might make it, he still might put on an ear, but next to this 2-collar plant already, there's a pretty good chance this one will be barren, or it'll be a little nubbin, meaning that the stress between these 2 plants will be high enough that this plant will shut down the ear development of this one itself. Right. On the other side of the plant is this one, and it's suffering from starter burn. So we're missing part of the root system here, and we can see the brown damage here from the salt burn, again, on the embryo side of that seed. Now this one isn't made it out of the ground yet. It's trying to leaf out underground. The tip did get nipped a little bit, and it'll probably leaf out underground, but definitely if it makes it out, it won't put on an ear being next to this one. So if we're more than 1 collar behind the neighboring plant, you're gonna lose it. So when you're doing your stand counts out here, you have to count them as weeds, not as ears, and that's ears is what we got to have here to bring that stand in. So the combination of all these things that are taking place out here starts to eliminate a bunch of these that look green in a row, but they're really not worth anything. They're actually working against you in the stand establishment. Now we're going to assess just what we think we got out here for an ear count versus population, and then try to help him make the decision. Are we going to replant this, or are we going to let it go?
Up next, Ken makes the call. Is this field good to grow, or will it need to be replanted? The answer after the break.
There are 406 million acres of cropland in the U.S. Winfield is helping to make them work harder. Maybe the answer isn't a new product, but a new way of thinking. A way to turn data into something you can harvest, driving efficiency into every molecule. It's time to rethink what a business partner can be. It's time to be greater. Winfield.
These are what we call viable plants. They're going to put on an ear. This one will not put on an ear. This one would be at high risk. Probably in best case scenario, if I had a good flex hybrid out here, we're looking at 120 to 140 bushel. If I have a determinate hybrid out here, I'm probably looking at 100 to 120 bushel. Now, unfortunately for this particular farmer in this particular field, it is what we call the determinate ear type. So in a determinate ear type, it means that very little flex compared to other hybrids. All hybrids flex, but this one is not going to flex much. So population is important to yield. And that's one of the first questions I would ask when I get to the field with a grower. What's the characteristics of the hybrid we're looking at? How much flex does it have? Flex in length, flex in kernel depth, make up for shallow populations. How much moisture do we have to work with so we can replant? So are we going to end up planting back in dry soil? In this case, we've received 1.5 inches of rain. We have moisture. So moisture's here for us to come back and replant in it. Then you're going to look at what's our time window as far as how much yield potential have we already given up, and that has to be factored into it. And in this situation, we're looking at a field that typically runs between 2 and 250 bushel. So there's almost 100 bushel spread between doing this right or living with the stand that we have here today. So from that perspective, you know, we're going to make the call that this probably needs to be replanted. We're going to assess cost, and the cost is, of course, your seed to replant it, and maybe more insecticide depending on the hybrid you're working with, and your starter fertilizer cost if you add that back into it, and then the preparation of the field. One of our problems is these plants that are still just barely emerging, and those that are folded up like this don't have much leaf area out here, so it's going to be pretty hard to kill that plant that's just sneaking through right there right now. We would probably only get about a 40 to 60% kill out here. So herbicide control, the other problem is depending on what product we use, we may have to wait anywhere from 7 days to 2 weeks before we can replant corn because of the recropping restrictions. So it really makes this a tough call from if we're going to try to spray this and kill it. If this was not Roundup Ready corn, of course that'd be pretty easy. We could kill it and we could plant right back in the same row if we wanted to. So for here, we're going to make the call to replant for the grower, and we're going to have to involve mechanical tillage. So we're going to come in here and till this field with a soil finisher and tear out all this corn. Now we will put in a horizontal layer, but that'll be the lesser of the two evils in the situation. Even as thorough as a soil finisher would be out here, we would expect to only get about 80% kill. So we'll have to till this field. We'll let her set for a few days and see what the survival is, and then we'll till it again. So we'll have 2 tillage passes that we have to assess to it.
Wow.
And then when we come back to plant, because of the technology like auto steer, this has been planted with RTK, his new row will go between the old rows.
Okay.
And that allows us then to bring in row crop cultivation to finish taking out what corn survives 2 passes. And you think, how can a field survive 2 passes with a field cultivator? Well, of course, if you wanted it to, it wouldn't. But when you're trying to kill it, we could still have 10% of this stand survive even 2 passes. And it kind of depends on the conditions after tillage, rainfall, that type of thing. And you wouldn't want 10% of this stand out here as volunteer corn. And then we have another mess. So the row crop cultivation will be one way that we would clean this out. But we still have a lot of time on our side. We still got a lot of potential. And in this case, we have herbicide restrictions as far as planting this to beans. So we're going to make the move on corn, but we're going to be patient. Instead of tearing this up and planting it today, we're going to tear it up today, and then we're going to let it set. We're going to see how much corn we kill, how much survives, and it'll get another tillage pass in a week, and then we'll plant it.
Over the generations, fertilizer, the unsung hero of the farm, has been in the background, quietly nourishing crops with very little fanfare. Until now. Meet the next generation of fertilizer. Micro Essentials.
We're struggling here this year with the drought situation. We were fortunate enough to get a pretty decent pollination. The question is, what's it going to take to hang on to these kernels to the end? And basically right now, to get this to hard dough, early dent stage, I need 2 inches of water a week. If I don't get that 2 inches, I'm going to have trouble. Now, in some of these soils, if the tie line's still running, I'm at field capacity, I could have anywhere from 10 to 5 inches of water storage. Unfortunately, we got farms that have, the tile hasn't run in a year, so they're below field capacity. That would tell me that I'm going to have to get 2 inches of rain a week to hang on to this kernel count to make it an 80,000 kernel count bushel. So that's what I'd be applying from an irrigation standpoint, or praying for if I didn't have irrigation. If I don't get any rain from here forward, I'm probably going to take this yield, potentially could be 180 bushel corn, it's going to be half. We're going to abort kernels and we're going to shrink size. But we got the hard part done, we got it pollinated, we didn't miss the nick. So that's step one. Now we need moisture and plant health to pack this thing full. So situation, give me 2 inches a week, we can count these kernels and do a yield estimate. Don't give me that, give me maybe 1 rain in between, you're going to have to cut that yield in half.